I'm sorry for the hurt that I've caused so many people. Today, if it were possible, I wish that I could take every bit of hurt on myself.
November 1st, 1984. The countdown had begun. Inside Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, Velma Barfield lay in her cell, wrapped in the stillness of death row. The dim, overhead light buzzed faintly, casting dull shadows on the gray concrete walls. Just outside her cell, a guard stood watch, his posture stiff, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the clock. Time was no longer on Velma's side. She stirred slightly under the thin prison blanket, inhaling deeply before sitting up. The room was silent, except for the distant clang of metal doors and the low murmur of voices in the hallway. It was an ordinary night in Central Prison, but for Velma, it was the last one she would ever experience. By this time tomorrow, she would be dead. Guards walked by, their expressions unreadable, their footsteps measured. There was a quiet air of finality in the prison, as if everyone understood that what was about to happen had been set in motion long ago. Velma Barfield, the so-called death row granny, would become the first woman executed in the United States in over 2 decades. At 6 a.m., a prison officer stopped outside her cell. "Coffee?" he asked. Velma nodded, rubbing her eyes as she reached for the steaming cup. She cradled it between her hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "I actually slept well," she murmured, as if amused by the irony of it all. She hadn't slept well the night before, but now, with the end in sight, exhaustion had won. By mid-morning, Velma was fully awake, sipping slowly on another cup of instant coffee while flipping through the pages of her well-worn Bible. It had become her sanctuary in these final years. Prison had stripped her of nearly everything: her freedom, her future, her family's presence. But it had given her something in return: faith. Her transformation on death row had been well documented. She had ministered to fellow inmates, read scripture, and professed remorse for her crimes. But remorse did not erase the past. The stains of arsenic, the slow and silent killer she had used, still marked her legacy. A soft knock at the bars drew her gaze upward. It was the chaplain, standing there with his hands folded in front of him. "Morning, Velma," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "Morning, Brother Phil." They spoke for a few minutes, small talk about the sunrise she couldn't see, about the letters she had received from strangers who believed in her redemption. But then the chaplain cleared his throat, his expression darkening slightly. "I just heard the governor denied the final appeal." Velma exhaled, nodding as if she had expected it. "That's what I figured." No emotion, no tears, just quiet acceptance. She was escorted to a small room where visitors would soon arrive. Among them was her pastor, Hugh Hoyle, who had stood by her through it all. He held her hands as they spoke, but there was something heavier about today, something neither of them had the words for. "Velma, is there anything left unconfessed?" he asked her, his voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head. "No, Brother Hoyle, I'm ready to go." The words hung between them, heavy with finality. At 6 p.m., it was time for the last goodbyes. Hours before the execution, Velma Barfield was allowed her final visits. Her brothers, Jimmy and John, arrived first. Their conversation was light, touching on childhood memories, carefully avoiding the inevitable. They laughed softly at old stories, steering clear of the reality that this would be the last time they saw their sister alive. Then came the visit she had been waiting for. Her children. Ronnie and Pam entered the room, their faces heavy with grief. Pam clung to her mother, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to let go. Her body trembled as she held on to Velma, her fingers digging into the fabric of her mother's prison-issued clothing. "Please," she whispered through her tears, "please don't leave us." Velma didn't cry, not for herself. She held her daughter tightly, her hands steady. "I need you to be strong," she told Pam, her voice calm. Ronnie stood nearby, silent. His pain was more measured, more controlled, but no less devastating. Velma turned to him, giving him final instructions, how to handle the funeral arrangements, how to take care of Pam. "Don't let this moment define you." The guard stood nearby, watching. Time was slipping away. The announcement came. Visiting hours were over. Pam refused to let go. She buried her face against Velma's shoulder, sobbing harder, gripping tighter. The guards hesitated before stepping forward. Ronnie gently pulled his sister away, whispering, "Don't look back." But Pam did, and the image of her mother, frail, calm, yet marked for death, would haunt her forever. As she was led back to her cell, a correctional officer stepped forward. "Mrs. Barfield," he said quietly, holding out a bright yellow mum, "this is from the men of Central Prison, a small token of their love and concern for you today." Velma blinked in surprise. She reached for the flower, her fingers wrapping around the delicate petals. "Thank them for me," she said softly. Then it was time for her last meal. Her request was simple: cheese doodles and a Coke. The guards brought the snack to her nearly 30 minutes late. She didn't complain. She barely ate. Instead, she picked up a pen and opened one of the 2 small white Bibles from her stack. Her fingertips, dusted with artificial orange cheese powder, traced the delicate pages as she wrote. These would be her last messages. Velma. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands clasped together, shoulders trembling. The weight of the goodbyes was unbearable. The memories from earlier in the evening clung to her. Pam's sobs, Ronnie's silence, the quiet sorrow in her brother's eyes. She had remained calm, but now, alone, the reality pressed down on her. The food remained untouched. The Coke sat unopened. The cheese doodles barely touched. She picked up the pen again, flipping through the thin pages of the Bible. Her fingers, still stained from the meal she never finished, moved carefully as she scrawled her final words. Time was slipping away. It's now exactly 1 hour till execution. Her 2 attorneys arrived to say their goodbyes. They each held a single rose, their faces drawn. One of them, Richard Burr, struggled to speak. "I feel like I failed you," he admitted, his voice raw. Velma shook her head. "You did everything you could." For her, this wasn't about the legal battle anymore. She had accepted her fate. At 1:45 a.m., the guards appeared at her door. "It's time." She set down her pen. The last letter sealed, the last words written. "Are you ready to see the chaplain?" one of the officers asked. She nodded. "Any time." Then Chaplain Phil Carter entered the cell, carrying a Bible. He expected her to need comfort, reassurance. Instead, Velma spoke only of others: her children, her family, her lawyers, the warden, even the people who were about to take her life. That's all she talked about, Carter later recalled, not herself. The time had finally come. Velma dressed in her pink pajamas, her final request honored. A diaper was added as a grim practicality. Her wrists were bound in leather straps. A heart monitor was taped to her chest. She did not resist. She did not cry. She remained silent, still, cooperative. As she was wheeled toward the execution chamber, she clutched the small Bible to her chest. The mum from the prison chapel lay on the table in her cell. She would not see it again. At exactly 2 a.m., Velma was wheeled into the sterile, white-walled execution chamber. The straps tightened over her body. The 4 lines inserted. From behind the glass, the witnesses sat in silence. Her victims' families, her own children. The governor had made his decision, and the state of North Carolina was about to carry it out. One of the witnesses exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Hard to believe a sweet old lady like her could do something so cruel," he muttered. A prison official turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "You ever hear what she did?" The question lingered in the cold air. It was a question with a long, bloody answer. The crimes. Velma Barfield was not the woman people thought she was. Born Margie Velma Bullard in 1932, she was a small-town girl from South Carolina, raised in a strict home with a domineering father. By all appearances, she had lived an ordinary life, married young, raised children, played the role of devoted mother. But beneath that quiet exterior was a woman hiding deadly secrets. It was the death of Stuart Taylor that unraveled everything. Stuart had been her fiancé, a man who trusted her completely. But trusting Velma Barfield was a fatal mistake. On February 3, 1978, he began feeling ill. Nausea, dizziness, burning pain in his stomach. Doctors suspected a virus, but Velma knew the truth because she was the one who poisoned him. A beer laced with arsenic. A slow, torturous death. Stuart suffered for days, vomiting, shaking, his body shutting down piece by piece. Finally, he was rushed to the hospital, but by then, it was too late. On February 4th, 1978, he was dead. But Stuart Taylor was not her first victim. The autopsy revealed a high level of arsenic in his system, unnatural. unmistakable. Investigators dug deeper, looking into Velma's past. What they found was a pattern of death. Velma was a killer in plain sight that people missed. Before Stuart Taylor, there was Jenny Lee, Velma's own mother. In 1974, Jenny had fallen ill. Her symptoms? The same as Stuart's: vomiting, stomach pain, weakness. At first, she recovered, this time fatally. Doctors believed it was natural causes, but Velma knew better. Then there was Thomas Burke, a man in Velma's care. Died suddenly, no explanation. Montgomery Edwards, another patient. Same symptoms, same outcome. John Henry Lee, her husband. A house fire, ruled accidental at first. But in hindsight, investigators suspected something much darker. 4 deaths, all under Velma's watch. 4 wasn't a coincidence. 4 was murder. Then came the arrest that changed everything. The walls finally closed in on Velma on March 2nd, 1978. Police had been piecing together the timeline, and one fact stood out. Wherever Velma Barfield went, people seemed to die. She was arrested, charged, and locked away as investigators exhumed the bodies of her previous victims. Their findings? Arsenic, every single one. The trial. Velma sat in the Fayetteville courtroom, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The jury watched her closely, struggling to reconcile the frail, soft-spoken woman before them with the brutal crime she was accused of. But the evidence was undeniable. Forensic toxicologists took the stand, detailing the levels of arsenic poisoning found in Stuart Taylor's body. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Velma had poisoned Stuart to cover up her own financial fraud. She had forged checks in his name, and when he started noticing the missing money, she silenced him, the only way she knew how. When it was Velma's turn to speak, she admitted to killing Stuart Taylor. "I did it," she confessed. "I poisoned him, but I never meant for him to die." The courtroom was silent. Her defense attorneys argued that she was a victim of her own addiction to prescription drugs, that her judgment was clouded, her actions not entirely her own. But the jury wasn't convinced. After only 47 minutes of deliberation, they returned with a verdict: guilty. Sentencing came swiftly. Velma Barfield would be executed by lethal injection. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She had known this was coming, but knowing didn't make it any easier. It's now 2:20 a.m. back at the execution chamber, where Velma was facing her fate. Velma's body remained still on the gurney, her breath beginning to slow. The drug cocktail was circulating through her veins now, inching her closer to the inevitable. The warden read the charges aloud one final time. "Velma Barfield, you have been sentenced to death for the murder of Stuart Taylor." Somewhere in the viewing room, a man scoffed. "The only one they could prove," he muttered under his breath, because the truth was, Velma Barfield had left more victims in her wake. The witnesses watched as her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. The execution was progressing. For Velma, there were no more appeals, no more second chances. Outside the prison walls, protesters had gathered. Some shouted for justice, others begged for mercy. Inside, the reality was unfolding, a reality set in motion the moment Velma poured poison into that beer. Her fingers twitched slightly, her body slowly surrendering. The past could not be undone, and now, neither could this. At 2:21 a.m., Velma Barfield's chest rose and fell in steady, controlled breaths. The lethal injection process was gradual, designed not to shock, not to disturb, but to shut down the body in stages. First, the sodium thiopental, clouding the mind, dulling consciousness. Next, the pancuronium bromide would paralyze her muscles, halting movement and breath. Her eyes fluttered slightly. Did she feel it, or was she already too far gone? Beyond the glass, the faces of the witnesses remained tense, unreadable. The only movement in the room was the slow tick of the clock marching towards the inevitable. 6 years had led to this moment. 6 years on death row. When Velma Barfield first arrived on death row in 1978, she was a convicted murderer, a serial poisoner whose name carried rumors of deceit. The guards regarded her with caution, the other inmates with quiet curiosity. But something happened inside those walls. Velma, the killer, became Velma, the believer. Inside North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women, she found religion with a fervor that surprised even those closest to her. She read scripture daily, devouring every word, seeking comfort in the only thing she had left, faith. She ministered to fellow inmates, offering prayer and counsel, becoming a kind of spiritual leader behind bars. Even the prison staff took notice. She was no longer the woman who had stirred arsenic into cups of coffee or poisoned her own mother. She became soft-spoken, motherly, and calm. She spoke often about God's forgiveness, about redemption, about the power of a changed heart. And yet, the state of North Carolina was not interested in redemption. The victims' families were not interested in redemption. To them, she was not a saved woman. She was a murderer. As the years passed, her lawyers fought tirelessly for clemency. They argued that she was not the same person who had committed those crimes, that Velma Barfield, the one who had poisoned with cold precision, was gone. Her pastor, Hugh Hoyle, pleaded her case to North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, urging him to recognize her transformation. "She is a changed woman," Hoyle insisted. "She has repented. She has spent these years ministering to others. What good does killing her do now?" The answer came in the form of legal rejections, one after another. Each appeal was denied, each hope crushed. By October 1984, it became clear Velma Barfield would not be saved. The execution begins. Now back to the execution chamber. It's 2:14 a.m. The warden stepped forward. "Velma Barfield, do you have any final words?" Velma exhaled softly. She spoke calmly, her voice steady. "I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry. I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years." At 2:15 a.m., the warden gave the signal. The signal was given. Inside the sterile white chamber, Velma Barfield lay strapped to the execution gurney, her arms outstretched, IV lines already inserted into her veins. The sodium thiopental began flowing first, a powerful anesthetic designed to induce unconsciousness within seconds. Velma inhaled deeply, her chest rising and falling one last time under the dim clinical lighting. No struggle, no panic. Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly began to close. The effect was almost immediate. Her breathing became shallow, her body still. The drug worked to dull her senses, pulling her into a deep, irreversible sleep. On the other side of the glass, the witnesses remained silent. Among them sat the family of Stuart Taylor. They had fought for this moment. 6 long years of waiting, appeals, delays. One of them leaned forward slightly, his hands clenched in his lap. Across from them, Velma's own children, Ronnie and Pam, sat stiffly. Pam had begged to the very last moment, pleaded for clemency, but now there was nothing left to fight for. She stared at her mother's still body, tears slipping silently down her face. At 2:17 a.m., the second drug is administered. Pancuronium bromide, a muscle relaxant, a paralytic agent. It would stop all voluntary movement. It would ensure that she did not twitch, did not jerk, did not make a sound. If she was in pain, no one would ever know. Her chest barely moved now. The heart monitor beeped steadily, each beat fainter than the last. A prison official shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the clock. They had seen executions before, but somehow this one felt different. The first woman executed in the United States in over 2 decades. A grandmother, a caregiver, a convicted killer. At 2:19 a.m., the final drug. Potassium chloride was pumped into her. This was the one that would stop her heart. A small, clear bag emptied into the IV line, sending the lethal dose through her veins. Velma Barfield's fingers, once clutching a small Bible in her lap, did not move. The beeping of the heart monitor slowed, slower, and then flatline. A single, high-pitched tone filled the room. The warden stepped forward, clearing his throat. His voice was flat, professional. Time of death, 2:21 a.m. Velma Barfield was dead. The tension in the room did not lift. Inside the witness gallery, no one spoke. Velma's body was unstrapped from the gurney. 2 prison staff lifted her onto a stretcher, securing her with white sheets. A door at the back of the chamber opened. A waiting ambulance stood ready to transport her remains. The state of North Carolina had carried out its sentence. Velma's name would go down in history. The first woman executed after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Inside her empty death row cell, the small yellow mum from the prison chapel sat on the table, petals wilting in the dim light. Her Bible lay beside it, pages still open. A verse she had read just hours before, John 11:25. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. Did she believe it in those final moments? Did she feel regret? Did it matter? The execution had already happened. The poison had already done its work. Years before, in cups of coffee, in bowls of soup, in trusting hands that never suspected the truth. And now, the needle had done its work too. Was it justice or just another death? The answer wasn't clear, and maybe it never would be.